Okay, so can we now turn to Claudio Pasquet, who is going to talk to us about his memories of extensive involvement with the church. Erica, are you going to introduce Claudio?
Yes, I just wanted to say one thing. I didn't know if I was allowed to talk after Tim. One word. It's one person who was very important in what Tim talked about, ecumenical and relationship, was Monsignor Mark Langham, who unfortunately died last week, and who was part of our meeting in Cambridge when we discussed the beautiful thing of the Pope going to the Waldensian Church in Turin and asking for forgiveness for what the Catholic Church had done in the past. And Mark was one of the speakers, and he's always been very, very open and friendly and amazingly ready to talk and to be part of the ecumenical group. So maybe somebody who knew him, or we can certainly write something about him in the next Waldensian Review. And now, Claudio Pasquet. So Claudio Pasquet has been, I think he was, he did his year abroad in Scotland, if I'm not wrong, but if I'm correct, he can correct me. He has been a minister for over 40 years in Brescia, Milan, Bobbio Pellice, Torre Pellice. He's now in San Secondo. He's been obviously very popular with the Waldensian mission. So he came twice, once before I started being involved, and then the second time when I had just started, and then eventually a third time he will talk about it. And he also has been, he did lots of things, but he's been member for many years of the World Reform Alliance, and since 2017, he's a member of the committee of the World Communion of the Reformed Church. And I think he was also involved in the Centro Culturale Valdese, of which we'll hear later. So, benvenuto, Claudio.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right. When I was asked by Erica to tell something about my 2 or 3 missions for the Waldensian Church Mission, I told her, but I can't remember anything. I'm an old man, you know. But after that, I realized that I remembered too many things, so I had to choose what I could say. The first thing is how the vision of our church has changed in your committee too, and how your committee has changed. The first time I was there was 1986. I was 31 at the moment, a young minister, and the leader, one of the leader of the Waldensian Church Mission at that moment was the Bishop Ward, Bishop of the Free Church of England, that I didn't know it existed, but I discovered that it existed. And he used to tell me a vision of the valleys, particularly of the valley and of our church, that I didn't know, because he used to visit our church mainly in the late 40s and 50s. So he told me of a church which I didn't see anymore. For instance, he used to go to visit the small village of Pradel Torno, hiring mules to carry up all the things they needed to live there, because there was not a road. Now there is a road, but there are no people living there anymore. So the changement and of the vision that the committee in 1986 had of our church was a church of the past, which didn't exist anymore. Nevertheless, I can remember coaches of people coming for the Waldensian Day. Not one coach, I think at least 2. So a lot of people involved in the mission for our church. That was quite moving for me. I must say, they were not all young people. There were a lot of quite old men and ladies, but people that for all their life had known what was the mission of our church in Italy, and not only in Italy, also in South America. Normally, we gather in a gorgeous old Victorian building, and after that, it was for 2 days, I think. Once with the committee, another day for the Waldensian Day, and after that, I was sent to visit people all over England. I can remember just few things. In Swindon, where I met a local priest, very high church, Anglican, very high church, who couldn't understand why we wanted still to be Protestant. And he said, you live in the Catholic center. Why don't you join the Catholic Church? Or at least, why don't you join our church, the Anglican Church, which is more alike to Catholic Church? I tried to explain him that Beckwith had tried the same thing, but he couldn't do that. But I remember meeting a pastor, a Reformed pastor in the suburb of London, who was extremely critical against Mrs. Thatcher and the social and the cuts of social welfare in that moment. And so I realized that the church in England was facing a changement of economical and political life, which would affect our life and our church in the few years later. I also remember Prescott Stephen and his wife. I stay at their home in Hackfield, and I can remember the true love he had for our church and for the history of our church. I can say I remember him as one of the men outside Italy who taught me a lot of things about the history of my church. Second time for your mission, I think it was 93 or 94. I don't remember much about the meeting, the Waldensian Day, but I remember that I was sent to visit some churches in the north of England, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, not the most fascinating town you have. And there I remember that I had to preach in a church of England, where people then asked me for almost an hour after the worship news about my church. So I realized that it was quite odd that in my situation in Italy, there are a lot of people who do not care at all about our church. And over there in Liverpool, there were people from an Anglican low church very much interested in my church. That, I think, was part of the mission your committee had done in those years. I remember also a reform minister in Birmingham that led me in a visit in the suburb of the town, explaining me the social problem there were with unemployment and difficulties of life of common people. But what I also remember of that visit is an evening meeting in King's Lynn, where few ministers had organized an evening where I had to speak about the life of my church. And these poor ministers were so upset that nobody, apart the ministers, and I had a clear picture of what secularism can be. And that picture became reality few years later in my church as well. The third visit was a visit organized for the Cromwell Day. We are in 2005. There were the 450th anniversary of the Piedmontese Easter, the big slaughter of the Waldensians. And we tried to celebrate the support that Oliver Cromwell gave to our church. And well, I remember we could bring some flour in the basement of the Parliament House where his statue is. And I remember that we were there. I was at that moment, it was pastor in Torre Pellice. We went there with the youth people choir of our church, and they had a couple of concerts, and I had to preach both in the Methodist Hall, big Methodist Hall in Westminster, and also in another Methodist church in the suburb of London. That is another picture of the mission of your committee, which is also to celebrate history and historical relation we had among our churches. General souvenir of these meetings. Well, poor you who had to try to understand my English. Second, you made me work a lot. I did, I think, 5 or 6 historical conferences, 7 sermons, or entire worship in English, you know, which is not evident for me. Meetings with committees, but, and I go to the conclusion of my speech, what I remember is that in these years, the question that were asked to me changed because the reality has changed. In the 80s, many people were asking me about the political position of our church. In that period, we must confess, it was a quite left-wing political position, and not all people were used to agree with us. In 1990, the big question was, which are your relation with Catholic Church? And now, when I meet people, not in your committee meetings, but in World Communion of Reformed Churches, now the question are 2, refugees and ethics of the church. Generally speaking, I think you are doing exactly the job you were started for. Mr. Beckwith, when he founded your committee, said that we had an evangelistic mission toward Italy, a mission toward people in need, let's think the school he built up, and a mission to be known in Italy as a part of the Italian society. Thank you for your patience.
And thank you very much, Claudio, for your rising to the challenges of the English language and you know, we are extremely grateful to all the contributors who are not native English speakers, that they are able to speak so clearly and so much from the heart about the various issues. We